Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for being here for the annual comprehensive financial report release for the 2024 fiscal year. I want to first just acknowledge what's going on in the city and in Western Pennsylvania. There are people without electricity, without internet, without essentials, without access to roads. And, we thank our first responders, to the folks, the linemen, the electricians, the utility workers who are out trying to fix and restore service for everyone. This is, as you all know, required per the Home Rule Charter to be released on or before May 1st. So we needed to get it out, but I do know that there's a lot going on in the city. What I'm going to do today is I'm going to walk through verbally figures, then I'm going to go through the slide deck, and then we'll turn to Q&A. We'll get started. The general fund, which is the city's chief operating fund, received $7.1 million more than it spent. General fund revenues totaled $672.5 million in 2024, which was an increase of $25.6 million in 2023. These are GAAP figures, which is how the ACFR and audit are assessed. On the day-to-day, the city operates on a cash basis, and for those figures, we collected $703.6 million. The city's fund balance, which many of you know is the rainy day fund, is at $199.9 million. This represents 27.9% of the 2024 expenditures, with, of course, 10% considered healthy. Budget projections have this figure decreasing by $130 million between now and the end of 2029. The fund balance in 2023 was $198.7 million, which is obviously pretty stable. Revenue, money that comes in. Real estate, $143.4 million came in 2024, which is $8.2 million under budget, which was at $151.6. This is a $5.6 million decrease from 2023 and down from the all-time high in 2022 of $153 million. We issued approximately $33 million in refunds. Deed transfer finished at $47.9 million and again fell short of budget by $11.2 million. This is still an increase, though, over 2023 and down from the all-time high in 2022 of $65.4. EIT, the city's wage tax, was at $5.6 million, increase at $137.3. This finished, our wage tax did finish over budget at $1.1 million. Amusement and parking, which were huge topics during the pandemic, have both completely rebounded. Amusement finished at $20.9 million in 2024, which was a $2.6 million increase over 2023 and $2 million over the budgeted amount. The low in 2020 was $3.9 million. Parking, $58.5 million, which was above budget at $51.5. This is a $2.6 million increase over 2023 and $2 million over that budgeted amount. In 2020, that figure was at $33.8 million. The LST, local services tax, which is the $52 that people who pay to commute into the city, which is the amount that the $52 per person for folks who drive in from out of town. We collected $13.7 million, which is under budget at $15.7. We finished at $13.5 in 2023. In 2024, the figure would be approximately 264,000 people working in the city of Pittsburgh, reflecting a relatively stagnant job growth in the city. In 2022, the approximate number of people working in the city and paying that tax was 298,000. A lot of that can probably be attributed to folks who had been teleworking and their pay stubs hadn't caught up. Payroll prep was at $75.8 million. The budget was $75.7, $3.9 million more than we collected in 2023. This is the tax levied on employers in the city or have employees working in the city. From 2023 to 2024, the local services tax and the payroll prep tax are generally stable, and in conjunction with the EIT or wage tax, suggest that wages are increasing marginally, but job creation remains slow. Facility usage fee, which has been a hot topic, is the fee assessed on athletes, performers who come into the city to perform. As many of you know, this is currently before the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. We cannot predict the future. We resumed collection in Q2 of 2024, and it's still finished under budget at $1.6 million. We can talk about that more later. Investment earnings, which is in my opinion, a really bright spot in the 2024 revenue line. We collected $28.1 million, which was far above budget, which was at 16.5. This is up from 18.3 in 2023 and is a huge win. The 10-year average utilizing a modified accrual or the GAAP basis hovers around 7.5 million a year. If you go back further to the pre-pandemic portfolio and economy, the average investment earning is at 2.5 million a year. There have been no meaningful increases to payments in lieu of taxes. We collected $613,000. For comparison, Erie County was budgeted to collect $1.5 million in pilot payments, and Erie City $1.1 million. Their ACFRs haven't been released, so we don't know what those totals at the end of the year were. Charges for services came in at 37.9, 3.3 million below budget, but a modest increase over the 37 million we received last year. The services collected here are largely comprised of parking meters and ambulance reimbursements. If you look at the ACFR itself, page 187 lists that 21 million came in the total ambulance billing receipts. Licenses and fees are up 17.1, significant jump from last year. Fines and forfeits revenue remains stagnant, decreasing by $400,000. And the line collected, the biggest source there is the Pittsburgh Parking Authority tickets that the PPA collects. Now we're going to do some GAAP numbers. Continuing on revenue, though, intergovernmental revenue increased by 45 million, up from 184 in 2023. And then I want to flag we made our final deposit into the general fund from the American Rescue Plan, and that was about $47 million last year. Now I'm going to talk about expenditures. Expenditures increased by 66 million to 923 million. Revenues were at 890 million, expenditures at 924, and other sources, mainly at the issuance of a bond, was at 65 million. These are the GAAP figures. The cash basis expenditure figure was 699.7 million, which is an increase over the budget of 681 million. This number includes debt service. Without debt service, the expenditure line is 637 million. To more articulate our concerns with the expenditures, when you look at the 2022 amended budget, which does include ARPA money, we were expected to spend 655 million in 2024. Our burn rate is increasing and things are more expensive. The 699 million figure does also not include transfers, as they're not considered expenditures. The city transferred more than 35 million to programs like the URA Housing Opportunity Fund to pay for the housing bond issuance and the Stop the Violence Fund. Salaries, overall, we spent close to $500 million on salaries, 285 million in salaries themselves, and then 211 million in benefits. We spent $53 million in overtime. This year's budget is at 47 million, and we've already spent 18, representing 39%. If you're interested in looking at the top departments of its expenditures, they're available for analysis on pages 10, 11, and 12 in the ACFR itself. I'm going to touch on ARPA a little bit. So 46.5 million went into the operating fund in 2024. It's the last deposit. 53% of all ARPA dollars, 178 million, went into the general fund over the last 4 years. As of 12/31, the end of the year, total unspent of ARPA money is 32 million. 13.2 million is still in the ARPA trust fund to be spent by the end of 2026. 2.9 million of that has already been paid out this year. These projects include the Food Justice Initiative, housing through the PHDC units and the land bank, and then the ARPA capital projects account has a balance of 19 million, and 2.6 has been moved out already this year. Debt and debt subsidies were at 81 million in 2024, 8.8% of the city's annual expenditures. This is expected to spike at 11.1 in 2025 and 11.6 in 2026, when payments will rise to $74 million and $78 million respectively. This will return to normal levels in 2027 with a $47 million payment. A $58.5 million general obligation bond was issued in 2024 that will be used to fund capital projects. Pension costs to the city were at $107.8 million, up 2.9. State pension aid was at $28.3 million, up $28.3 million to $29.8. I'm going to talk a little bit about Q1 since we're into May now. And I just want to flag that these projections are highly variable. So for what we can determine, assume, or be worried about, basically, is that tax revenue in Q1 indicates that tax revenues are likely to be down significantly below budget in 2025, with payroll prep being the most notable variance. Local services tax is down 12.5% from Q1 of 2024, while payroll prep is down 16.6% compared to Q1 of 2024. These are indicators of potentially reduced employment within city limits, even though city residents are continuing to earn at approximately the same rate. This may reflect employers moving outside of the city, along with a reduced self-employment. The budget reflects the LST continuing to shrink in revenue, which could mean concerning projections for our city's economy. Deed transfer continues to be down significantly, even though real estate is likely to improve marginally with assessments and prior year payouts being done. This is a result of a slow housing market that is only growing slower. Charges for services are way up, which is attributable to meters and ambulance services. Longitudinal data, we've gotten worse as a city at predicting real estate revenues, as we all may have expected. Deed transfer remains extremely hard to predict, both in the pandemic, within the pandemic market and outside of it. And in general, the city has done a fairly decent job at predicting our revenues and expenditures as a whole, but the margin of error is growing closer and closer as the years go on. Many of you covered the projections that we produced as an office in the spring of 2024. Those figures, our Q1 projections from the last ACFR based on Q1, were under $1 million off from the combined actual totals for real estate, deed transfer, and EIT. The city as a whole was off by $18.4 million. Our revenue projections based on Q1 was off by $2 million, while the city's projections were off by 10.6. The 2025 budget projections were revised from 2024, and it appears our numbers and concerns were taken into consideration. The Controller's Office 2025 revenue projections, which is was the likely scenario, were at a $666 million, and the 2024 budget, the 2024 budget's 2025 revenue projections were at $6.83 million, and the revised budget that was approved had a projected revenue of $668 million. So I want to just going to go through the deck, and then but I want to first acknowledge my colleagues in the Controller's Office that have so greatly contributed to this report. Jamie Zala is the Chief Accounting Officer for our office. This is her second ACFR, and last year she was drinking by the fire hose, and this year it was really smooth listening seeing with our team. So Jamie, Kelsey Wade, Vicki Clark, Frank Thurner, Sarah Simmers, Brian McGregor, Tamika Phillips, Carrie Murray, Namita Dreckawarth, Mark Jester, Doug Anderson, Coleman Lamb, Andrew DeWitt, Mark Petak, Megan Quattrini, the city's finance team, the city's OMB team, and our auditors, Meyer Dussel. So let's roll through the deck, and then we'll do Q&A. So fiscal health of the city overall, 2025 and 2026, as you all know, have ballooning debt payments due to loans deferred during the pandemic. This year's debt payment is lower than previously anticipated. We continue to recover from the pandemic. American Rescue Plan funds are ending. Shifts away from in-office work, reduced value of the biggest downtown properties, and a major reduction in that downtown tax value. We're dealing with historically high interest rates, fewer home sales, and less tax revenue, and we need for spending decisions in the city to reflect this uncertainty. The city's interest earnings have grown significantly. Much of it is due to the American Rescue Plan funds, savvy investment decisions in the finance department, and the high interest rates have provided the city with long-term security with that. Licenses and permits have become more profitable as we see development across the city, and parking revenues have rebounded along with that amusement tax to pre-pandemic levels. This is the annual where your money comes from. I'll echo what has been said for the last 15 years, that we have a very high reliance on city residents for tax revenue. EIT, which is the wage tax, and property taxes make up a significant part of that portfolio at nearly 50%. Where your money goes, the number one priority, I believe, of a municipal government is to keep people safe. 44.6% goes to public safety. This is the unassigned fund balance, or the rainy day fund. Again, it's at basically 200 million, and it's expected to drop by 130 million over the next 5 years. EIT, wage taxes again. Local services tax is at 13.7, that's at $52. And just to reiterate, this figure dictates, you can guesstimate when you divide that number by 2, or by 52, how many people are working in the city of Pittsburgh. Notable, real estate, again, decreased, EIT increased, amusement and parking increased. 2024 budgeted versus actuals. These are looking at where we could end up at the end of 2025. We're very worried, again, about the payroll prep and the local services tax, the LST. Again, 2024 budgeted versus actuals, all revenue. And then this is the one I just want to briefly touch on, and then we'll go to Q&A. Over the last 2 years, and I'll start with this. Like I said last year, thank goodness for the American Rescue Plan. Over the last 2 years, city expenditures have outpaced revenue. While we're able to manage this with the help of the American Rescue Plan, that support ended in 2024. The gap is not impossible to fix, but now is the time to get serious about tracking our budget closely, thinking creatively about how we bring in revenue, and making sure every dollar we spend is contributing to the health and welfare of Pittsburghers. So with that, I'm happy to take questions.
Just to start, you said that investment income from 2024 was a bright spot for
Yeah.
the year. In quarter one, I'm going to guess that there's a little bit more tumble here. Can you talk a little bit about sort of how the chaos we're seeing in markets might affect city operations going forward?
Sure. So the Trump administration is using tariffs as a way to manipulate revenue. That's a separate conversation, but it does create significant volatility in our economy here, anywhere in the United States, and quite frankly, probably around the world. What I would say is things are going to get more and more expensive. So it's that, like, the raw cost is going to increase. And I think what we're seeing today, actually, we have our quarterly report for our quarterly meeting for the Comprehensive Municipal Pension Fund. And I'm looking forward to seeing what that has done to our invested portfolio. As you know, the comp fund we play a long game, right? We're here for the long run. The revenue from investments that we see in the operating budget is more sensitive to changes in the market, right? So I think it's unrealistic to see those figures continue into this year, into subsequent years. That is reflected in the budget. It's just we're in an impossible position to predict what the Trump administration is going to do, how it could impact the economy. And these are in accounts that are not long-term investments, right? They're in cash accounts. They're so we can pull money out and spend it immediately. So I don't know that we have a number comparatively with Q1 2024. We're down 1.6. So we're down 1.6 million from where we were at the same time in 2024. And I think that volatility will only increase between now and the end of the year.
Rachel, what would you tell the average person at home who's going to sit here and listen to something like this and say, well, okay, this video sounds like what does it cost? I mean,
yeah, thanks, Rick. What I'll tell you is, on the whole, as I said at the beginning of last year and when I started this job last January, 2024, we were always expected to be okay, right? Our concern, the reason you raise a red flag is not because you're, in trouble tomorrow. It's because 2025, 2026, 2027, 2028, and 2029 are very narrow years financially. And we're telling you that the cash that has been buoying us, right, the investment income, we won't be able to rely on, in my opinion, moving forward because of the volatility in the market. There are bright spots. Wage tax revenue continues to increase. If the volatility in the market continues, we'll probably see much less indeed transfer year over year. That is predicted in the budget to go down, but I think it's given the unpredictability we've seen in the last 18 months with home sales and how much of a part of the portfolio that has been for the last 5 years. I think realistically, we need to be serious and honest with city residents, right? We're going to see fewer acquisitions of new vehicles with the fleet. We're going to see less paving. Thankfully, the petroleum index, which mostly controls paving costs, is tied into the economy and it won't fluctuate as much. It's a more stable cost center, but we need to be honest about how, people might not see their roads paved, right? We're going to see a contraction in some of the services that people are used to seeing on a daily basis, right? I have never insinuated that we were on the verge of Act 47, but what I will tell you is these narrow budget years don't provide us with a lot of flexibility. And given where we're anticipated to be at the end of 2029, I think that it's a conversation we need to have with city residents, right? We need to make sure that they understand where things are headed. I have been worried about overtime since last fall, and we'll continue to monitor that quarterly. I am worried that we're not spending enough on the fleet, right? There was a post agenda in January, and according to our audit figures from 2018 and the numbers presented by the director, we have 51% fewer vehicles on the road. They're spending more and more time at the garage in the Strip District. So for stuff like that, to me, we just need to be mindful and know what's coming. And again, if there are huge fluctuations in the economy, there's a president that's functioning and making decisions via tweet, and when someone whispers in his ear, it creates a lot of unpredictability anyway. But knowing where we're headed, we need to be careful.
Now, the administration has said that it's going to be a few lean years, but then they said in several years there'll be a debt service that'll be paid off.
So that's absolutely true. So there are in 2025 and 2026, we're going to spend in the aggregate roughly about $50 million more on debt service than we traditionally do. So it'll resume to 47. I think the 2027 payment is expected to be $47 million. But we have shrinking revenue that we rely on, right? If the facility usage fee, which I hope that the Supreme Court rules in our favor, but if they don't, that's $30 million over 5 years. So we need to be aware of where things are headed. And yes, the administration acknowledges that in 2025 and 2026 it's going to be particularly lean, but the spending on fleet per the capital budget in the ELA is going to be at $3 million in 26, 27, and 28, right? So there are indicators that, that decisions have been made that reflect this narrowing, but at the same time, these swings in the economy nationally because of the Trump administration, I believe, due to their ineptitude, I would say, it could fluctuate things more. So I think that there's a lot of unknown about how the Trump economy is going to play out for municipal governments, including the city of Pittsburgh.
Does the city need to cut non-essential services or raise taxes?
I think that right now, I don't believe we are headed for a tax increase. I think that this is manageable. I think that the city needs to make sure that we're making the best decisions we possibly can in terms of where we're spending money. I think it's table 10 in the ACFR, which is in the back of the book. We call them the NEBI tables. Reflects, you can see the increase in hiring in the city and where positions have been added. I think, we need to be aware of where we're adding staff and make sure that we're making the best hiring decisions. I have been very vocal about the Pittsburgh Bureau of Police and making sure we have an adequate number of police officers on the street. We want people to come downtown. We want them to feel safe when they're downtown. So I don't believe we are headed for a tax increase, and I do think it is manageable.
Are there departments that need to be cut that aren't essential services or public safety concerns?
That isn't something we evaluated for this report. I think that's probably a longer conversation on where things are headed with the city, but that was not something done, for the ACFR. I am very concerned about where things are headed, and I think it's important that the city, both leadership and city residents, are just mindful of our current financial position.
It seems that we hear a lot about needing additional investments for things like the fleet and infrastructure, but at the same time we see revenues going down.
Yeah.
What would you like to see the city do to try to balance those competing narratives?
We mentioned the payments in lieu of taxes. We need to have a financial relationship with our large nonprofits. This is an ongoing conversation that every person who's stood at this podium or the one on the 5th floor has said, but it needs to come to fruition. We do well when they do well, and they do well when we do well. The current relationship is untenable for a lot of reasons, but least of all is, like I said, Erie County is collecting 1.5 and Erie City is collecting 1.1, which is paltry considering that our pilot in the aggregate is at $615,000. So that needs to be a relationship. And I also think we need to have a conversation around economic growth and how to make sure that the tens of thousands of college students that come to Pittsburgh every year to go to school, what can we do to attract them to stay? I am someone who did that. I didn't grow up here, and I moved to Pittsburgh to go to college, and I stayed, and I bought a house, and I worked in Pittsburgh. So we need to make sure we're being proactive about growth and doing and working on whether they be programs or financial incentives, I'm not sure, but doing something to attract people. We need more residents, right? When someone moves to Pittsburgh and buys a house and works here, they pay a deed transfer tax. They pay real estate taxes. They pay wage taxes. So how can we do better as a city to, incentivize people to move here? We need to be managing growth, not decline.
Rachel, you discussed, you talked a little bit about overtime. Is that a cause for concern for you?
Yes, I am very worried about the overtime budget in 2025. Yeah. And if you want a copy of we put out a report, I think 2 weeks ago on overtime. I don't know. But we can get you a copy of it. But yes, I flagged that when I was at my budget hearing in late November, early December. I am worried about the cost of overtime. You can assume that if you're paying more in overtime, you're paying less per employee. But our numbers indicate that it won't get to zero or get to balance by the end of the year, which will be an expense that we don't currently have budgeted for.
The mayor's Public Works, what was your figure that they had already spent 80% of their overtime?
I do not have the line-by-line breakdown. What I can tell you is that as of the end of Q1, we've spent 39% of budgeted overtime in the city of Pittsburgh.
So what happens with Public Works when they face prices like this and demand overtime? The city doesn't have the money to pay for it.
The city will move money around. These people are going to get paid. They're earning their wages, and we will have no issue making sure that we're paying the people who are doing this essential work on behalf of the city, whether they be in public works or public safety. But the money will come from another department, and that's up to OMB and finance.
Do you think this was an irresponsible budget on the part of the administration?
This was a
Underfunding the fleet, underfunding overtime?
So our office does not budget. We certify revenues, and I'm thankful that the administration heard our concerns that we yelled from the rooftops last spring. But we are not a budgeting entity. I expressed my concerns to the administration last fall, but what I would say is I'm going to reiterate, we need to be mindful of where we're headed. We need to make sure that overtime is appropriately budgeted for and that we're spending money in places that are the top priorities for the city, which again, I believe are keeping people safe and keeping things clean and making sure we're honoring that commitment to our workers and retirees with the pension fund.
The mayor's office has talked about, I think, a $4 million surplus for 2024. How do you kind of view that in the context of all this, I guess?
In terms of the operating budget, that is accurate, but that doesn't include transfers out. So it doesn't include the $10 million we send to the Housing Opportunity Fund. It doesn't include the money that we transferred to the Stop the Violence Fund. It doesn't include the $2.5 million that we sent for the bond issuance. So we did, and again, I am thankful for that. And I think the updated figures in the budget that was presented in September and then approved subsequently in November, December, reflects the concerns we had about revenue specifically. But it's the $4 million surplus is from the operating.
Rachel, when the administration gets asked about financial stuff, one of the things they often say is, we got these great bond ratings, we've had stable or improving bond ratings. How significant is that in your view? How much should people read into that this is a stamp of approval from bond ratings, that actually the city's finances are pretty good?
I would say, one, it's the rate we secured in April. I'm so glad we closed when we did. So that is awesome news. And I think we need to make sure we're continuing to invest in our capital assets, which is what bond proceeds go toward. A bond rating is different than an ACFR. And my concerns, I think, remain regardless of the grade. And I would say that, my concerns still stand, and the bond ratings look at a lot of different factors, and this is what we're updating everybody on is 2024 and Q1 of 2025 finances.
It strikes me too that so many of the challenges the city faces are sort of macroeconomic, what Donald Trump was.
Yeah, for sure.
Whether Pitt gets research funding
Yeah.
would affect your college students, stuff like that. How much ability do city officials really have the ability to chart their own course when we're talking about the real estate market writ large, which is obviously a national kind of phenomenon?
I don't expect anybody to wave a magic wand and impact the real estate market here in Pittsburgh or in Sacramento or in Austin or in Miami or Atlanta. What I will tell you is we cannot rely on a stable economy under this administration. The president has demonstrated that that's not his stability is not his guiding principle. And I think how he's treated the independent chairman of the Federal Reserve is really concerning, just in case if and when Jay Powell leaves. But there is no magic wand to stabilize the economy, period. And I think what we need to do as a city is be aware of that, recognize trends and when things are rapidly changing, and then be as nimble as we possibly can to modify revenue to match modify expenditures rather to match that revenue. And the thing I'll say too is expenditures are also a really volatile issue. You have, what is lumber going to cost in 6 months? What's a vehicle going to cost? A ladder truck or a truck and a chassis for an ambulance or a police vehicle? We have no idea, and we've gotten the tone out of Washington is basically that they don't care how this impacts regular people, which means they certainly don't care how it impacts municipal governments.
With the rainy day fund going down quite a bit, close to that 10% limit, what is a good goal for that? What would be a healthy level? Is 10% a good goal, or do you want to be higher?
For me, I'd like to see it stay between 15 and 17% just because of the volatility we saw during the pandemic. God willing, we won't see another global pandemic. But I do think that there are enough variability, there's enough variability in the market and with the economy, and we live in a global economy, right? So if there's something terrible that, something terrible that happens in China or in India or wherever, we'll see that impacted here, right? The interconnectedness of all of us is only going to make that more and more likely.
Given how much the fund balance is set to shrink, is the city financially able to respond to unexpected crises or to drastic cuts from federal dollars that we rely on?
Right now, yes, absolutely. And that's why the fund balance is so important. Rick?
Wondered if you could weigh in on, you had mentioned the ARPA funding, and it's $335 million the city received. I'm curious about one of those line items in the ARPA fund expenditures that they had denoted for it. Like a third of the funds were spent on avoiding layoffs. Are you familiar with that? I mean, can you weigh in on that? Do you know more about that and what that was about, given the fact that they apparently hired 100 DPW workers?
What I would tell you is that the city was in a very delicate financial position at the conclusion of 2020, and we were rapidly spending money. We were in a hiring freeze, and the COVID money helped us avoid that. And it stabilized the general fund for 4 years, which I'm very thankful for.
Now it's done.
Now it's done.
The city's budget is $6 million for the entire fleet this year. In the 5-year plan, that goes down to $3 million to 220, whatever, less than $3 million for the next 5 years. Is that sustainable with the fleet in what everybody contends is
No.
a deplorable condition?
Absolutely not. No. It's not. There's no other way to say it. We need more money for the city fleet, period. And that includes fire trucks and ladder trucks. It includes ambulances, which is a truck and a chassis. It includes police vehicles, snow removal vehicles. No, it's not. If you said you need to pick where more money is going to be allocated, it would be the fleet. Ambulances are breaking down. Fire trucks are breaking down. If you go down to the city garage, there's a waiting list for vehicles and large equipment to be seen.
Rachel, could you express your concerns about the Stop the Violence money? You sent a letter the other day to council and the mayor talking about these Stop the Violence funds being doled out before council approval?
So there are, the Stop the Violence had allocated $2 million to Poise to distribute community grants in 2022 and 2023. Council approved the initial distribution. There was a committee that met. The subsequent distribution, the monies were released. They were never approved by council. The website, the Stop the Violence website lists 2024 recipients. I have not seen, they reflect the 2023 recipients, but it's not clear to me what happened. And then last Monday, I was forwarded an email about a new grant program out of the Stop the Violence account, I believe. It was very unclear. I just want to make sure that those monies are going to programs where they'll be best utilized. In my opinion, public safety should be a part of those conversations, right? If you can do violence prevention work and include police, fire, anybody from the public safety apparatus, I think that that's ideal programming. We are not budgeteers, I want to reiterate. So my big issue is transparency. How are these decisions being guided? The grant allocation email that we saw reflected an increase of $1 million to $2 million. That's within their prerogative. They're able to do that. But it seems to have done an entire 180, if you will, from the initial plan with Poise. And again, I'm glad that the decision-making is coming back into the city, but that didn't happen with the 2023 allocation. And again, the 2024 allocation that's listed on the website is unclear to me and to our office. So we just think that there needs to be more transparency with how those grants are being awarded.
I also obtained some data about secondary police employment, detail employment. It shows invoices dating back to 2022, uncollected invoices, uncollected money. Apparently there's in the neighborhood of about $2 million that has not been collected. Are you going to audit that?
We did an audit. It was released in 2022, and it primarily discussed the delinquent accounts and issues with paperwork. So I'm disappointed that those problems haven't been addressed.
It looks like it's even gotten worse.
We are not under audit, so I'm not going to comment on material that I haven't verified. But what I will tell you is it is an issue, and it has been an issue, and we just want to make sure, A, that people who are paying for city services are actually paying, and the taxpayers aren't instead fronting that money, and it's never being billed appropriately. Delinquent accounts folks need to be notified, right? Are they notified that they owe 90, 75, whatever $100,000 to the police secondary employment trust fund. So my big concern is just making sure that we're getting those accounts to current, getting people paid.
Getting paid, the officers are getting paid.
Yeah, so that's how the trust fund works that way, right? The city fronts the money, and is the best way to run the program. I mean, you can't wait for 60 or 90 days for someone to pay an invoice and have the police officer who's working not get paid for that time. So the right way to do it is to have the city front that money, but we need to make sure that we have guardrails so that people who aren't paying aren't using city services, right?
Any final questions?
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.